Good morning, Broncos fans. You are watching Legends of Mile High, and I'm your host, Thomas Hall. And we are going to talk about current events and blend in history as we always do on this show. And today we have something very interesting, at least to me, when it comes to coaching trees. We're going to talk about how coaching trees can pass down success and what that means for the Denver Broncos in their coaching search. And frankly, there's a way you can kind of tell if a inexperienced head coach is going to more likely be a good head coach based on where they came from. And I've spent a lot of time digging into this data, and I've actually put an article out about it, and I'm actually going to write up something else hopefully soon. So it'll be interesting to see for sure. And I'm going to talk about it today. But first, I just like to jump into the chat and grab a couple comments. We've got Jeremy Sean coming in already. Thank you for coming in from YouTube. Really appreciate that. Jeremy says, Morning, Thomas. If we end up hiring Ryans, there is something about it that feels like we are righting the wrong of passing on Kyle. I believe everything happens for a reason. Well, I hope so, Jeremy. Appreciate the comment. I hope that they do pick the right coach. I mean, when we went into this, into this off season, the buzz was that they wanted an experienced coach, someone who could come in after all these first timers kind of failed. Yeah, I mean, let's hope that you're right. That whoever they hire is the right one, and the Broncos get back to their winning ways. So yeah, thanks for coming in this morning, Jeremy. Appreciate it. Dave Glassman, good to see you in this morning, coming in from YouTube. Morning, MHH morning crew. Don't let the coaching search tie you up in knots. Que sera, sera. Yeah, I've actually, I'll just say, thank you for the comment and thanks for being here this morning. And I can't wait to hear your comments on some of the things I have to talk about. But yeah, I got so tired of talking about the coaching search. It was just, I was exhausted, really. And I was going to talk about the 10 greatest Broncos of all time this morning. But after doing this research, I figured it would be a good thing to jump into this morning. And it is about the coaching search, but it has a lot to do with history. So I'm, I'm exhausted from the coaching search. I don't know how many shows we've spent talking about it, but it feels like 100. I don't know. So I just want it to be over. I want them to hire a good coach and be done with it. So Dom is coming in as well, saying good morning, coming in from Facebook. Good morning, Thomas Scott in Broncos country, Denver Broncos for life. Appreciate you being here, Dom. Thank you. I can't wait to hear some of your comments in the chat as we dive into this. So thank you for being here. Michael Ronquillo is coming in from Facebook with Facebook stars. Yeah, that's great. I always like seeing you in here in the morning. I know it's early, but appreciate you being here. And Michael says, good morning, Thomas, on Legends of Mile High. Go Broncos. Bradley Conger is also saying good morning to Broncos country. And yeah, Broncos country, I hope you're tuning in because, I mean, I find this very interesting. And I've talked about this and I've thought about this for a long time. So when we dive into this, it'll be interesting. And I'd like to hear your takes on my thoughts about it. Clayton Huron, another Facebooker coming in. Thank you, Clayton. I always enjoy seeing you here in the morning as well. He says, "Morning Broncos country, smash that like button and share." And from coming in from Wisconsin, I'm sure it's nice and cold there right now, and but beautiful in the summer. So thanks for joining from Wisconsin and the Midwest Broncos country. So thank you very much. Yeah, please do like the show and follow and subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can get the alerts when the show comes on. And you can follow me on Twitter for some other in between my show takes at Thomas Hall NFL. And then also you can watch me again tomorrow night. I'm on a show called The Orange and Blue View with Ron White. Just getting started. It's fun and more current events definitely than history, but it's a good show and we're really trying to get that going. So make sure you check that out as well if you have some time on Saturday night. So thank you very much. Thank you for everybody being here. So let's start to talk a little bit about coaching trees. So there are a few coaching trees out there that have kind of stood the test of time. And the interesting thing is one would think that the George Hallis tree is one that would go on forever. which it really hasn't. It's kind of strange. He coached for 40 years. He was he's Papa Bear of the NFL. He started in 1920 and coached for 40 years. And now there are some of his disciples, so to speak, some people with some of his coaching lineage still in the NFL today, but nobody that's had the most time spent with someone from his line. But there are some, obviously the Bill Parcells line is still going strong. You got Belichick and all his assistant coaches. And Parcells is kind of an interesting case. He actually was an assistant coach in the Chuck Fairbanks line, but he only was there for 2 years. So was that enough to imprint, that leadership style? And that's kind of what I'm talking about here. Does a coach from that original line, do they do it well enough to imprint their leadership style to be passed on? Is it sticky enough to be passed on for several layers of that coaching tree? And it seems like it's true. And that's an interesting thing to think about, these great coaches of the past, or even good coaches of the past, how they can pass on more than just X's and O's, right? The X's and O's is important, but to be a real leader of a team, you have to have something more. You have to have some sort of leadership. And I've talked about this several times on this show and and social media, is that there's more to it than just being good at scheme. You have to be able to take all of these people, coaches, players, they all come from different areas or different ages, and you have to be able to develop a strategy and be a good enough leader to get all of that combined into the onto the field and make it a winning organization. And even coaches that were not great at scheme, Dan Reeves comes to mind. Like, his scheme didn't fit John Elway, and he had a tough time winning that Super Bowl. But he was such a good leader that he brought in the right people. And even with lesser players, he was able to get those teams to the Super Bowl. So there are some coaches that they imprint, and it still has effect today. So let's talk about the Parcells line just for a moment. I mean, Belichick is the primo coach from that line, and without him, the Parcells line kind of dies, right? And only two coaches removed from the beginning, the Parcells beginning. They have a tough time. Anybody that comes from the Belichick line, there's only a couple that actually had some success. The rest have been failures for the most part. And I'm not talking about like just maybe 500. I'm talking about below 500. They just were not. They just can't move that leadership style on. And I think a lot of it has to do with the style of leadership. Bill Parcells and Belichick's style doesn't fit every situation. And the reason why Belichick actually stepped into the New England Patriots and did so well was because it was kind of set up to be successful already. Parcells was in New England, and then he left. And I know Carroll came in for a while, but there were still players that had bought into a system that were still there. So when he went to Cleveland, man, the players rebelled from it. Even Kosar got traded away because he was bucking against the system, and it was causing trouble. And Belichick wasn't as successful there, but he stepped into the right situation. But that type of leadership in New England, that type of leadership doesn't jive with everybody. But he also had one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time fall into his lap in the 6th round, so that helped as well. But there are other leadership styles that seem to fit as it moves through all of these branches of the tree, right? So I'm going to jump into a couple chats. I got Michael coming back in saying DeMeco Ryans is now my one candidate as the Broncos' new head coach. Yeah, thank you for that. That Ryans is going to be a front and center of this talk today because of his lineage. So yeah, I appreciate jumping into that, because I'm going to talk about the Jim Lee Howell line and what that means for DeMeco Ryans and others. So Jim Lee Howell is considered one of the greatest coaches of all time, but that nobody really remembers because his disciples were so great, right? So he coached Vince Lombardi and Tom Landry, and those two are amazing coaches, Hall of Fame coaches. But Jim Lee Howell kind of gets forgotten about that, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that he he was kind of never took credit for anything. He was very he seemed like his leadership style was kind of nonchalant, and he kind of passed off the success to everybody else. But he was one of the winningest coaches, on percentage of all time. So he was a really good coach, but he spawned two of the when you think about Vince Lombardi, the greatest coach of all time, and then Tom Landry is up there, in the tops as well. But his line has been passed down, and there are several coaches that come from his line. So if you follow it from Jim Lee Howell to Tom Landry to Dan Reeves to Mike Shanahan. So Mike Shanahan spent a lot of time with Dan Reeves, and I know he gets a little bit of credit, in the Bill Walsh system, which came from Paul Brown. But the difference is he spent so much more time in that Reeves leadership style that had more influence on him, because the more time you spend with a mentor, right, the more you learn. And he spent some time with Seifert and a little bit in that Bill Walsh system, and he brought a lot of the West Coast principles, the offensive principles, but his leadership style is from the Jim Lee Howell style. And today there are 5 coaches in the NFL from that line, and everyone can be considered pretty successful. I mean, you've got Kyle Shanahan, who's, the 49ers are on the cusp of going to another Super Bowl, right? And then you have others from his line as well that are out there. I mean, even the solid in the Jets, he had a pretty successful season, even with all the quarterback turmoil and whatnot. So that is a system, leadership style tree that is amazing. They're able to take their strategy and get everybody to buy in, and then let it play out on the field in a successful manner. Now, I know that Jeremy's talking about the Shanahan Bill Walsh tree, and so Shanahan has some influence from Bill Walsh. Jeremy says the Shanahan Bill Walsh tree dominated the 90s and dominating today. It is unbelievable. Mike is not in the Hall of Fame. All 3 Broncos world championships are fruit from that tree. Yeah, and I'm just going to tell you, he did spend some time in that Bill Walsh tree, but only for a couple of years. Really, he spent more time in the Jim Lee Howell tree, and I think that Reeves, Landry, Howell style imprinted on Shanahan. So I give more credit to that side, but the X's and O's piece, the West Coast piece, that's an influence. And I'll just make a little bit, just tell you something that kind of brings that together. So Don Coryell is going to probably be in the Hall of Fame. He's up for the Hall of Fame, and he revolutionized the offense in the NFL. And there's principles today that are still mainstays in what he did. But as a coach, as a leader, he was not. He didn't have a lot of success on the field, and his disciples, the ones that come after him, didn't either. So the offense may be great, right? The offensive system, how he designed it, the principles that have been passed down, and there's tons of Air Coryell principles and disciples that use that offense throughout the NFL today. But his coaches aren't here. That line is kind of gone. There's some influence, but that leadership style didn't last. It's interesting. It's interesting to look at that. So when I talk about the Shanahan tree, it's really Jim Lee Howell's tree. It's Tom Landry, it's Dan Reeves, Shanahan. Then you got Kyle Shanahan. You have Kubiak, who was successful. And if you think about these, I've been looking at the last 10 years. Any coach that actually coached in the last 10 years. And I've been studying them for their career and where they came from. And I found some very interesting things. So before I jump into that, Miguel, coming in from Facebook Stars, man, it's the first time I've seen you on here, so I really appreciate your comment. And Miguel says, I feel like Mike Shanahan has that tree and turned late round nobodies into a juggernaut. Sharp, Davis, Rodman, McCaffrey, Chef, Kiss should be in the Hall of Fame. It is interesting. That's the thing about Shanahan, and the thing about the coaches from that tree is they tend to be able to be good at leading and putting people in the right position to succeed. And yeah, Davis was a late round choice, mostly because he got injured he had an injury in Georgia, and so he fell in the draft. People would like to go back and redo that, and Sharp was a Dan Reeves Dan Reeves drafted him in the 7th round and turned him into a tight end, which was a great move. Obviously, he really revolutionized that tight end position, and a lot of the reason why the tight ends are used today is because of Shannon Sharp's success. So, yeah, it is quite interesting. But if you look back at Reeves, he had some late round picks that panned out as well. I think a lot of his first rounders weren't great, but he was able to take those late round picks like Carl Mecklenburg and give them a shot. And that's the thing, is they give him a shot because they don't care where you came from, as long as you can play and buy into that strategy and do it on the field. They don't care if you were a undrafted free agent or a first rounder. You were there because for a reason. They saw something in you. So yeah, it's interesting to think about that. So as you look at some of these coaches that are in still from the line, you got Sid Gilman that's out there now. Sid Gilman's line still there. The Parcells line. You got a little bit of Bud Grant out there, but it's small. It's mostly players that have kind of had the same amount of time in both of those lines. You got some Jimmy Johnson line out there in the last 10 years still. And, he came from the college ranks and was kind of the first one. You got Lou Saban, which is interesting because he was a Broncos coach who didn't do very well, but did really good with the Bills. Paul Brown, which is actually the Bill Walsh's line. So Bill Walsh coached for Paul Brown, and he learned a ton of leadership from Paul Brown. Dave, what about Air Coryell? Yeah, I just talked about that, Dave. Air Coryell, his line as far as coaching is kind of diminished, but his offensive innovations have not. So, like I said, Don Coryell was a good coach, not in as far as leadership. Getting what he needed to do, onto the field and create something great. But passing that down, there's not a lot of that leadership style that's stuck. It's not real sticky. It doesn't go. It's really not in the league anymore as far as heavily influenced in that line offense for sure. So if you look at these lines today, right, there's one that stands out. I mean, above the rest for being incredible, right, for having success. Now, Paul Brown's pretty good. His line is you look at teams that have or coaches that have more 500 seasons than not. He's pretty even. It's about 17-16 in the last 10 years. That's pretty good, and a total of 7 championships. But that's a lot of coaches, right? They have a lot of coaches that in the last 10 years have been passed down. And Parcells, actually, if you take out Bill Belichick, it's a miserable line. I mean, if you take out his winnings, and it's hard to take that out. I mean, because he's so successful. But just 2 coaches removed, most of those coaches had below 500 records. But the one that sticks out is Jim Lee Howell, right? And that's the Shanahan. That's where Shanahan comes in, right? He has more above. He has almost 2/3 of those coaches from that line are above 500 in the last 10 years. That's a pretty good track record for success. And everybody that's coaching today from that line is pretty successful right now. Even the Jets, right? They had a winning season and they were pushing for the playoffs, so that was fairly successful. And that's probably the weak link. But you got Kyle Shanahan, who right now is doing quite well. And LaFleur comes from that line, and McDaniel out of Miami. So there's some pretty good, and McVay. I mean, those are all really disciples from that tree. And for some reason, that leadership style imprinted and passed on. So if you look at today, you look at the coaching search today, especially the coaches without experience, when you're trying to understand, are these coaches going to be good? Obviously, you want to do the whole process. You can't just use one data point to say, oh, yeah, they're going to be a coach. You have to go through the interviews. You have to see what their past success as coordinators and things like that. I just want, before I jump into that, Dave came back in with a question about what about Bud Grant? Yeah, Bud Grant is it's interesting. He has some influence. There's a few coaches today that are that have a little bit of Bud Grant in them, right? So it's evenly split between others. So when I think about um, sorry, I'm drawing a blank here. Staley, yeah, from the Chargers. He has a little bit of Bud Grant line in him, so he does. And then also Pete Carroll's got a little bit of influence from Bud Grant, so not as much, but it's still out there, right? And then if you think about Dan Quinn, who was in the coaching search, but just recently, went back to Dallas. Said he's going back to Dallas. He has a little bit of that influence, so it's not as heavy. Most of the teams today are Paul Brown, Parcells, or Jim Lee Howe for the most part. There is some Sid Gilman line out there, and Sid Gilman line is not as successful as one would think, even though he is known as an incredible coach as well. But if you think about those inexperienced coaches, we're looking at the Broncos interviewing really three of them. That's D'Amico Ryans, Evero, who's the defensive coordinator for the Broncos, and then David Shaw. Really, Shaw has head coaching experience in college, and he has some NFL experience, but he's never been a head coach in the NFL. And that's what I'm talking about here. I'm not looking at the college ranks. I'm not looking at who they were influenced in the college arena. I'm talking about NFL because it is really a different game. It's a different style, different way of coaching. And it's and oftentimes we see those college coaches come in and fail. And recently, Cliff Kingsbury, who came from didn't have any real NFL experience, any leadership experience. He didn't do so well. Chip Kelly's another one that was recent that just kind of washed out. So there are some that try and make it, but it is a tougher one. But if you think about those three, all three of them actually, two of them come from the Jim Lee Howe line, right? They're influenced through the Shanahan tree, and that's D'Amico Ryans and Evero. Both of them have experience in that. Majority of their experiences from that, and in the case of D'Amico Ryans, that's his only experience. He's only been with Shanahan, which kind of to me is a little bit something that I don't care for, because it is nice to have a little blend of other experience. But he's been around with 49ers and with Shanahan for a long time, and he kind of rises to the top because he has that most experience. So it kind of makes me think that if that leadership style imprinted on Ryan's, he's a good candidate, and if he can pass through the interview and say the right things, and the ownership is sold with who he wants to bring in as his assistants and other coaches, I'm not as worried about his lack of experience just based on the success rate of those that came before him. But there's always a chance that isn't, that it does fail and it doesn't work out. But I kind of lean towards Ryan in those three before, and now that I looked at this, I still lean towards Ryan. Now Evero is another one. He has a little less experience, and he's not really had a lot of experience at that top position right before you get to head coach. So he's only had one season as defensive coordinator, but it was great. I mean, he did a really good job keeping that team playing hard, working together, and even with the injuries, and when the season was, I thought the season was when the season was really done, I thought the defense was just going to kind of give up, but it never did. I mean, it suffered through that offense, and he kept them going. So that's another intriguing candidate who is definitely going to get a head coaching job down the road, I'm sure. And then you've got David Shaw, who comes from the Paul Brown line. He had some experience through that while he coached in the NFL, but he's 20 years removed, almost 20 years removed from that NFL coaching experience. So to me, that's that's a little bit lower down the list. So I don't know if I'm a big fan of David Shaw. So Keith Brugman, he's coming in to say, where is the next good coaching tree coming from? We speak of today dates from the 80s or further back. Thanks. Yeah, well, it's actually farther back than that. I mean, the coaches today are coaching from a tree that almost all of them date back to, the original coaches, so to speak. There's Paul Brown. Obviously, he's from a long time ago. You've got the Jim Lee Howell line, like I've talked about, Sid Gilman. Those are go way back. The original, like I said, George Halas, he has some influence, but not a majority influence on the coaches today. So really, the most recent are Bill Parcells and Jimmy Johnson, who they're kind of they started their own tree early. And like I said, Parcells had some influence from the Chuck Fairbanks, but it was only for two seasons really. So how much did that imprint, and how much is what he learned from elsewhere? I don't know, but yeah, I don't know where it's going to come from. We watched Cliff Kingsbury come in. That could have been a line that kind of fell out. Chip Kelly, like I said, he went away from. He didn't really have a lot of success. So that new line that was kind of going to be created is gone. So yeah, it's interesting. It will be interesting to see if a coach comes in from college with his own style and his own way of doing things and his own leadership abilities that were passed on from maybe some other college coach, not in the NFL, and start a new line. I don't know where that's coming from. I don't really see a lot of the college coaches getting interviews right now. So it's an interesting one that you're talking about there. Yeah, Parcells and Jimmy Johnson are the two that I can think of that still kind of have a lasting effect that were fairly recent. But most of them learned, from a long time ago. Uh, and there were a lot of coaches in the early days of the NFL that really didn't pass much on. They really just kind of died out. They didn't last long, or their assistant coaches didn't last long. And Hank Stram, he didn't even have an offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, really. He ran the show altogether, and so his line really didn't take off either because people weren't taking chances on his assistants because they didn't have that top position. So there's a few of them out there that could, and we'll see what happens. But in 20 or 30 years, maybe we're talking about some hotshot college coach that came in and kind of revolutionized the NFL. We'll see. But the NFL takes a lot of college schemes now and implement it with their own coaches. So um, it's interesting. And Keith, I'm going to answer your other question. Sean McVay comes from the Jim Lee Howe tree through Shanahan, and that's influenced with the Bill Walsh. Obviously, Bill Walsh and Paul Brown. He comes from Paul Brown, so there's a bit of that influence in there. But yeah, it's a Jim Lee Howe. Lawrence Rivera, thanks for coming in, my man. Appreciate it. What do you think, Thomas? Do you think Lynch made the 49ers more Broncos than the Broncos with players and coaching? Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, they kind of turned into what Mike Shanahan had with the Broncos, in the 90s and the early 2000s, right? And so maybe he did. It's interesting. You've got his son there. You've got that system. You got the zone blocking scheme. You've got all that Shanahan influence from offense plus the leadership style, directly passed on to his son. So yeah, it seems like the 49ers are more Broncos than Broncos now, if you think about it. But it's a funny question. I mean, it's a funny comment. I appreciate that to think about. Yeah, the 49ers. But I'm telling you, I'm not going to root for the 49ers to win the Super Bowl. I'm sorry, just can't do it. I know there's a lot of Broncos influence with Shanahan and whatnot, but I'm still scarred from the 55-10 loss when I was young. I can't bring myself to root for the 49ers. So even though it's Shanahan's line, I'm not going to be able to do it. So I actually hope it's a Cincinnati Bengals, Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl. So yeah, definitely. Thanks for that comment, Lawrence. Appreciate it. So anyway, that's really the gist of the whole thing is D'Amico Ryans is coming to the top, and I'm okay with it. Right. I was skeptical at first, just because like a lot of fans out there, and even the Broncos themselves, a little gun shy to take on a first timer at head coach. And because of the last three, and they've failed miserably, right? And so it's having that experience, having that proven winning experience will bring you more winning, right? And so that's why I was hoping for an experienced coach. And after Harbaugh left, I had my doubts about a couple of them. I brought it up on here before. Peyton and Quinn. So I don't know. It's after seeing Hackett fail, he's from the Sid Gilman line, and just watching him fail miserably kind of made me not want to for summer. But then I think about going back to Dan Reeves coming in, first timer, and the success that he had, and how good of a coach he was, and how long he stayed. And it's like, man, I don't want to, coach that's, going to retire in 5 years, and then we got to watch them start this whole thing over again. So, yeah, I'm kind of going back and forth. But, D'Amico Ryans is coming to the top, and I think he's a solid choice. I was kind of, after this, was leaning toward Jim Caldwell as an experienced guy, only because I thought he might bring Frank Reich with him. And I liked Frank Reich, and I thought the Broncos should have interviewed him. But now that Reich's in Carolina, I don't know who he'd bring in for his OC. And um, that scares me a little bit. So he's kind of moved down the list for me. But the thing about Ryans is, I think, there's talk out there that he would probably get rid of Evero, but I think that'd be a mistake. And I think if he's a good coach, he would see that Evero is good at his job, and can continue to keep that defense going. I don't, a good coach isn't going to meddle in that area, and so he'll bring in an offensive coordinator and hopefully keep Evero around. Michael Ronquillo, thanks for coming back in with a comment. He says DJ Jones and Kareem Jackson vouch for D'Amico Ryans as the new head coach of the Denver Broncos. Thoughts, Thomas Hall? Yeah, I mean, you've got players who have played with him or have been coached by him, saying that he's going to be a good head coach. Anytime you have somebody vouching for you, that's great. But it happens all the time. People vouch for their coaches, and people that they have a relationship with. But to stick your neck out for somebody and say that they're a good head coach, it's not just sentiment. It's not just I'm going to do this for a buddy of mine. You have to own that, and people don't want to be wrong. So to come out and say that is a plus for sure, definitely. And they have experience with them both in the coaching and playing days. So the unfortunately is Kareem Jackson's probably not going to be there. Most likely, he's probably not going to be with the Broncos after this season. So, he's may not be able to be coached by him. But anytime that you have somebody vouch for you, that's a good thing. And but it's happened to a lot of coaches, and whether or not those coaches pan out is a different story. But yeah, it's a good sign. And DJ Jones is fresh, really from being coached by D'Amico Ryans, so he knows his leadership style. He knows how he goes about his business. And the big questions that I have for D'Amico Ryans really is does he have an eye for coaching talent? Can he bring in the right coaches as assistants to help him succeed? And I think the offensive coordinator who he brings in is going to be an interesting, if he's hired, who that's going to be. And there's a lot of names kicking around out there, Brian Greasy being one of them. I think that'd be a mistake to bring someone super inexperienced with you. Is what Hackett did. He came in inexperienced, and he brought a bunch of inexperienced guys with him. One of them panned out. The other ones kind of struggled. So, yeah, it's starting to look like D'Amico Ryans is the guy. And I mean, I'm not going to speculate too much because I don't know. They're pretty tight-lipped, but he's kind of coming to the top. And when you see Quinn is backing out, Peyton seems like that's not going to happen even anywhere almost. I mean, maybe in Arizona, but he's looking like he's not going to get a job. He'll probably pull out of the running pretty soon if that's the way it's looking. So I was hoping that before this show happened that there would be a decision made from last week to here, and it's still not. So hopefully that decision is made soon, so we can go on to talking about the projecting for the future and how good that's going to be. So. So Lawrence Rivera has a comment here about Hackett, and he says, I think we got Hackett last year because a lot of other coaches turned us down now with the news on the Cowboys. Yeah, I don't think that's I respectfully disagree with you on that, because when I was really he was, from what I hear, is he was the kind of the person they had at the start. Hackett was their first choice. Peyton kind of fell in love with Hackett, and that was it. And they interviewed a lot of people, but Hackett was who they wanted. And I know there's speculation that they were trying to get Aaron Rodgers by bringing in Hackett. I don't know how true that is. Hackett really impressed them in the interview, and maybe that had some influence. I don't know, but yeah, I don't think it was. I think Quinn went back to the Cowboys after he realized he wasn't going to get the Broncos job last year, and that's when he announced he's going back to the Cowboys. So I don't know. I think Hackett was the first choice, and it was a mistake. Obviously, it was a huge mistake. But I don't think it was. I don't think they were his. I don't think he was their third or fourth choice. And Hackett was in the running in other places as well. I mean, there were other teams that had him high on the list and wanted him, and the Broncos landed him. So he was a hot candidate last season, and he ended up failing, unfortunately. And that was to the Broncos' dismay, of course. All right. So I hope, I really hope that you found it as interesting as I did when we talk about the lineage of coaches throughout the history and how that leadership is passed down. I really enjoy that type of thought and whatnot. So I appreciate everybody coming in. Michael's giving a parting shot to us with a great show today. Thomas Hall and Legends of Mile High Go Broncos coming in from Facebook Stars. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for being here this morning. I know it's early, but I appreciate everybody who's jumped in here. And I hope that this decision is made soon. I really hope that we see a decision come out as soon as possible. I know that the 49ers are still in the playoff hunt or playoff race and have a shot at going to the Super Bowl. So we may not hear something, maybe just some sort of, hey, we have a deal with them, but we can't really do anything until after this is all over. But I really hope that this gets announced soon and we move on to building the team for the future. See what the new coach brings, see what that person is building for the Broncos of the future. And if it ends up to being DeMeco Ryans, I hope he's the coach here for another 20 years. So that would be refreshing after these, one and done, two and done type coaches. So I appreciate everybody coming in. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for the discussion. I hope you learned something, and I'm going to sign off now. Don't forget to follow both Scott and I on Twitter and check out the other great Mile High Huddle YouTube podcasts. Have a great day, Broncos fans.